What do you know that they don't know around the impacts around this regulated drug market? Do you know better than they do when it comes to this policy?
I know what everybody knows. The result.
Welcome back to Another Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. Pierre met with Global News yesterday, where he was challenged on his position of Justin Trudeau and the Liberals' approach to decriminalizing drug use in British Columbia, and Pierre was not having it.
Let's take a look.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Good to be with you.
Do you have any confidence the changes that BC has asked for will make decriminalization better, or is the only solution here just to get out of this pilot entirely?
The only solution is to completely reverse the Trudeau NDP radical experiment of legalizing drugs and letting people smoke meth in hospital rooms and blow the smoke in the face of nurses, of letting addicts shoot up heroin next to children in parks. From the very beginning, this was a radical, senseless, Trudeau NDP experiment that was doomed for death and destruction, and sadly, the data shows that that's exactly what it has caused.
One of the issues too is there is very little data on how this was even working, but the examples you mentioned, drug supply, that's not impacted by decrim. Smoke in the face of nurses will likely change because of these changes. Do you believe that someone should be able to possess small amounts of hard drugs in their home and feel that they can call and ask for help without knowing that they may get arrested for doing so?
Okay, so a couple things there. Number one, this guy says, the reporter, he says, well, the change that they're, that you're talking about, Pierre, the drug supply won't change. Well, actually it will. Like, I find that, a crazy statement because...
Yeah, it won't be paid for by taxpayers.
Right. So, all of these new drugs that are actually being distributed onto the streets, this, it's what they call the safe supply or the clean drug supply, which is a ridiculous term in itself, those will no longer be available. And what that means is those will no longer be available for these guys to take them for free and then sell them to kids to get them addicted and perpetuate the whole drug problem all down the line. So that's the first piece. The second piece is that he says, well, do you think that people should be able to possess a small amount, a personal amount in their home so that way if they call for help, they won't get arrested? Okay. So I'll turn this one over to Fox.
Yeah, so we know a gentleman who used to work for the police in a large city, and we actually consulted him on this episode because we wanted his opinion. We said, if someone was using drugs privately in their own home, or maybe they were out in public and had overdosed, would you guys be applying a charge, like a criminal charge, for the drug possession, even though currently it is illegal to possess any amount of drug? It doesn't matter whether it's for personal use or for trafficking. You can get charged criminally. Outside of BC. Yeah, outside of BC. So we're talking the rest of Canada. And what he had said to us was that he's been out of the force for a couple years now. So he said his knowledge is a little bit outdated. He said, though, when he was working a few years ago, it would be very rare for him or any of the other officers to charge somebody for drugs, especially if they're like ODing and they need help. He says, I don't even care about the charges. What I care about is saving this person's life. Yeah, that's the priority, right? The priority of the call is that somebody's in distress and they need to get medical assistance. And he also said that sometimes they would get a call from a safe injection site and they would show up and, he said to us, like, what, do you think I'm going to
go around every single person at the safe injection site and arrest them all. It's, when you talk about it like that, it reveals the absurdity of it. So you say, of course not. Of course I'm not going to do that. If the guy's ODing and then he has, some marijuana and some crack and some other drugs on him, is he going to arrest him for that? No. What he's probably going to do is take all the drugs that he has on them and dispose of them, through the proper channels. And then that guy can go and get medical attention.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what he said, that he would make sure that the person is safe. He said normally the paramedics would beat them to the scene and already inject naloxone. He said that they have injectable, kind of like an EpiPen type thing, as opposed to like the nasal spray. Anyways, he said that the paramedics were often the ones to give the naloxone because they were there first, and then it was the officer's job to just secure the scene, make sure there's no needles lying around, make sure that there's nothing anybody else can get hurt, and then see that person to the hospital and make sure that they're alive. And that was the primary goal. So in talking to our friend, he had said they wouldn't really be applying charges of drug possession, especially in cases of like OD where somebody needs help. And he said you would be hard pressed to find somebody like an officer who would apply those charges back then when he was working in the force. And he said you would be especially hard pressed, he imagined, to find somebody who would apply those charges now with kind of today's attitude. So this whole idea of, oh, well, if you ask for help, you're going to get charged with drug possession, it doesn't really seem to match up with the reality that our friend was describing to us.
Should people feel like they can call and ask for help without getting arrested? Of course. That's not what this does. That has always been possible before decriminalization, and it's possible all over North America to call and ask for help, but only in one place in all of North America is it legal to use crack, heroin, meth on sky trains, in parks where children play, in hospitals where nurses now can't breastfeed their kids because they've inhaled meth fumes. Only in the wild and radical experiment of Trudeau and the NDP has this been possible, and the results are a nightmare.
Now, Pierre alluded to a few things there that he's also been getting flack for in question period, saying that nurses can't breastfeed their children, or that they are having meth smoke blown in their face, or other patients in the hospital are having meth smoke blown in their face. And Trudeau was trying to make it seem like this isn't true. This is just something Pierre made up. It's actually in a National Post article. It's a really good article. We're not really going to read it to you, but there is a link in the description, and that's where this information comes from. Pierre's not just making stuff up.
Yeah, and the article is titled, "We've Absolutely Lost Control. To Drug Users Desperate, BC Hospital Nurses Say." That's the title of it. So Pierre has been accused of making stuff up, of being inflammatory, but he's not making stuff up. He gets his stuff from the media. So maybe the Liberals should actually, take a look at the media.
Well, the Liberals hate the National Post because it's right-leaning.
Right.
Right? Like, oh, well, if it's in the National Post, it must be not true, is probably what they're saying.
So, these are not just, pieces of hyperbole that he, plucks out of thin air. They're grounded in reality and fact.
The amendments would change those examples you mentioned, though. One of the things BC is attempting to do is put in treatment beds, but they've failed largely. They can't get enough nurses, they can't get enough facilities. What would you do differently to support provinces around treatment, and how would you ensure that the resources are there to do it properly?
The problem is that Trudeau and the NDP are spending all the money on radical activists and greedy, corrupt pharmaceutical companies, all of whom have profited off of this nightmare. And I would cut all of that. I'd stop funding the radical activists, bureaucrats, and pharmaceutical companies who are making a fortune and perpetuating their own industry. And I would put that money into real treatment and recovery so that we can detox, counsel, give group therapy, physical exercise, and bring our loved ones home drug-free.
One of the issues that I have with Pierre's answer isn't his proposed solution. His proposed solution actually makes sense. The problem is that where are we going to get the medical professionals from? We already have a severe shortage in Canada. That's going to be the problem. So the Conservatives are going to have to really think about this and figure out where you're going to get these people from. Now, one of the sources that they could get them from is by implementing the Blue Seal program, which they're talking about, which is equivalent to the Red Seal in the trades. So there's no doubt many different medical professionals that are in Canada that have immigrated here, that have the skills that can do it, and they just need to be able to prove that they can operate as that type of profession in Canada with the expertise that they have. So that would solve some of the problem, but I still think that we're going to be in a severe shortage for programs like this. So they're going to have to think about how they're going to have those staffed in order to implement the actual framework that he's talking about.
Well, who are the radicals that you're describing?
All of the people that they're being funded by the NDP and Liberals to give out hard heroin-grade opioids and who have been advocating for this and profiting from this radical policy that no other place in all of North America is doing. So we need to cut off those radicals and fire the people, the NDP Liberal activists in the public health bureaucracy who have helped cause this mayhem and enabled Trudeau and Eby to bring in a policy that has killed 2,500 people in 1 year alone.
So in that vein, a radical would be Dr. Bonnie Henry. She has advocated to have a safer supply of drugs, to make this available for drug users.
I have to correct you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You seem to be repeating NDP Liberal talking points.
Well, I don't think they mentioned Bonnie Henry here, do they?
They do use the dishonest and inaccurate term and fully discredited term, safe supply, if I could, to describe unsafe heroin-grade drugs that everyone now admits, what they used to deny, are ending up in the hands of kids. That is not, whatever Justin Trudeau and the NDP say, that is not safe.
And this is an issue that we at Northern Perspective also have with the term safe supply. It's not a medical term, it's a marketing term. The correct term should be public supply of addictable drugs, or PSAD for short, because that's what it is. It's publicly supplied by the taxpayer, and these drugs are addictable. As Pierre said, they are heroin grade.
Yeah, so and the distinction that the NDP and the Liberals try to make is they refer to the toxic drug supply as opposed to the safe supply. Because one makes it seem like, oh, well, that's bad for you, but the other one is perfectly safe for you. No, an opioid's an opioid. The only difference is that the safe supply that the government's providing, there's no chance of it being laced with something else that is even deadlier than the substance that you're actually ingesting. There's nothing about this safe supply that is actually going to prevent you from becoming addicted. There's nothing that's going to prevent you from overdosing, aside from your self-control. There's nothing in there that's safe at all. Now, the other thing that we want to talk about is throughout this whole maddening program, we've heard this reference by the Liberals and the NDP in terms of the origin of this insane program called the Portugal Protocol. So we took a look into that and we wanted to see, okay, what is so great about the Portugal Protocol that they wanted to implement it here? Well, as it turns out, nothing, because they haven't implemented the Portugal Protocol at all.
No, they implemented the part where they decriminalized the drugs, but that was it. That's only a fraction. That's like the starting point.
And they even did that wrong. So we're just going to give you an excerpt from an article in The Guardian from 2017 where they discuss the Portugal Protocol, and we're just going to give you the Coles notes of what it does.
In 2001, nearly 2 decades into Pereira's accidental specialization in addiction, Portugal became the first country to decriminalize the possession and consumption of all illicit substances. Just as a side note, in this article, Pereira is a family doctor working in Portugal. Rather than being arrested, those caught with a personal supply might be given a warning, a small fine, or told to appear before a local commission, a doctor, a lawyer, and a social worker, about treatment, harm reduction, and the support services that were available to them.
The opioid crisis soon stabilized, and the ensuing years saw dramatic drops in problematic drug use, HIV and hepatitis infection rates, overdose deaths, drug-related crime, and incarceration rates. HIV infection plummeted from an all-time high in 2000 of 104.2 new cases per million to 4.2 cases per million in 2015. The data behind these changes has been studied and cited as evidence by harm reduction movements around the globe. It's misleading, however, to credit these positive results entirely to a change in law.
Portugal's remarkable recovery and the fact that it has held steady through several changes in government, including conservative leaders who would have preferred to return to the US-style war on drugs, could not have happened without an enormous cultural shift and a change in how the country viewed drugs, addiction, and itself. In many ways, the law was merely a reflection of transformations that were already happening in the clinics, in pharmacies, and around kitchen tables across the country. The official policy of decriminalization made it far easier for a broad range of services, such as health, psychiatry, employment, housing, etc., that had been struggling to pool their resources and expertise to work together more effectively to serve their communities.
So contrast this to what they did in BC, which is they brought in safe injection sites, they decriminalized the use, and they say that they've facilitated and added treatment, but here's the problem. There's no penalty for using the drugs. That's not the Portugal protocol.
And we're not talking necessarily a criminal penalty, but there does need to be a deterrent. And in Portugal, it sounds like they have decriminalized the possession of a 10-day or less supply of drugs. And instead, they refer you to an administrative form of like the criminal system. And I don't even want to call it the criminal system because it's not really criminal. But they refer you to this administrative arm, and you have to meet with a social worker, a lawyer, a doctor, or sometimes you might get a fine, or sometimes you might get referred to treatment.
Yeah, mandatory, right? So there's a backstop in place if you actually are found to be doing illicit drugs. Now, if you have over that 10-day supply, then you're into the criminal justice system, you're a drug trafficker, and off you go, and you're dealt with accordingly. So the problem is in BC, there's nothing. There's nothing to stop you from doing it. There's no consequence when you do it. The approach is, well, we'll reduce the deaths by the quote-unquote toxic drug supply by giving people, safer opioids where they can, potentially OD on themselves. No. Now, again, Global News has done some good journalism on this, and they have found that, the safe supply is going to tide people over for a little bit, but they end up not getting the high that they want. So they take those, they sell it to kids, and then they take that money to buy the harder stuff so they can get the high that they want. So all that's happening is they are perpetuating the drug problem and actually giving easier access to kids than they ever have before, because it's decriminalized and you have the government passing this stuff out, and it's ending up in people's hands actually across the country.
Well, and that's one thing that we found missing from this Portuguese protocol, is that it doesn't seem like the government is passing out opioid supplies. Like they're not prescribing these drugs to addicts. They're also not hosting safe injection sites, from what we can tell. In BC, and it's happening even in Toronto, it seems like the attitude is, well, you can do it, it's okay, you can do it here, or we will give you the drugs. It's almost like enabling.
It is enabling, because you're basically saying, oh, it's okay here. It's your life. You're free to do it. Well, this is the problem. Okay?
None of us live in a vacuum is what the problem is.
Right. And you have business communities all over BC and the other major cities that have safe injection sites too. But BC, you have all of these small businesses that are just out of their minds, because the crime rates around safe injection sites, no matter where they are through the roof, because that's the type of people that are attracted to these places. So you get crime, you get theft, you get murder, you get violence, you get gun, like it is absolutely insane.
And that's not the only hazard. I was on Facebook today and I saw someone locally had posted to beware of X Park here in the city because they were walking their dog and their dog stepped on a used needle. When we were speaking with our police officer friend this evening, he said to us, when we take our kids to the park, him and his wife, he'll walk around the park and make sure that there's no discarded needles or any paraphernalia that could be harmful if his children stepped on them.
Yeah, what world do we live in?
Yeah.
You're correct on that. And we have seen a surge in diversion, and Global BC has done a huge series of stories on diversion.
I will give you credit, because Global has done some very good journalism on this.
So let's talk about regulated supply then. Let's use that term, because that's how the province wants to describe it. I know drugs aren't safe in most situations. So let's talk about regulated supply. Dr. Bonnie Henry has called for it. The chief coroner in BC, Lisa Lapointe, she just left her job, but she had called for it as well. What do you know that they don't know around the impacts around this regulated drug market? Do you know better than they do when it comes to this policy?
I know what everybody knows. The result. The results are clear. The results are in. And it's been an absolute deadly disaster that has killed 2,500 people, for which Trudeau and the NDP and all of the activists and bureaucrats that work for them are to blame. We need to cut off the corrupt pharmaceutical companies, the liberal NDP bureaucrats and activists, and put all of the resources into treatment and recovery to bring our loved ones home drug-free.
And this is what I don't think the Liberals and the NDP seem to understand, that these drugs are not dangerous because they're not chemically pure, because they're not coming from a laboratory somewhere. They're dangerous because they have a high rate for addiction, and also they have an impact on your cardiovascular and your respiratory systems. That's why opiates are dangerous. They're addictive, and they do things to your body that can kill you. I mean, even if you are giving people chemically pure drugs, it's still dangerous.
Like, here's the thing. You know what the criminal underworld is not trafficking in? Advil, Tylenol, Pepto-Bismol.
Well, because those things are non-addictive.
Right. That's exactly my point.
And you also don't get that euphoric high from them either. And again, like, you can overdose on any drug. That was one of the things that they taught us in school. The dose makes the poison.
Worried about finding the nurses, the space. Our healthcare system everywhere is already taxed. Like how challenging will that be to find that part of the healthcare system, the support it needs?
Oh, it'll definitely be a challenge, and that's why we need to get rid of all of the money that we're wasting on NDP, liberal activists, on corrupt pharmaceutical companies that are profiting off of this death and misery, and put all of those resources into treatment and recovery. We also need to sue the pharmaceutical companies rather than giving them more tax dollars, to hold them accountable and collect millions and hopefully billions of dollars in liabilities from them for having caused this in the first place. The Americans have collected $54 billion from Big Pharma because of the opioid crisis. In Canada, the NDP and Trudeau, they don't collect money from pharma. They're giving them more money to profit them by buying even more of the heroin-grade opioids and give them out in our streets. That is radical, and it is deadly.
And for those of you that don't know, but I'm sure probably most of you do, but there's probably a few that don't. What Pierre is talking about in terms of suing the pharmaceutical companies is they were actually found to have known the dangers and the addictiveness risks to these drugs. One of the main ones I think was OxyContin.
Yeah, it was Purdue Pharma in the States. They were found guilty.
Yeah.
Purdue Pharma was known to have known that the drugs OxyContin, specifically because that was their patent, that OxyContin was addictive. So they were encouraging all these physicians to dispense OxyContin to their patients, and saying, "Oh, it's not addictive. It's not addictive." Yeah, it's an opioid, but it's a non-addictive opioid.
And they were actually paying doctors kickbacks
In the States, anyways.
Yeah, to actually prescribe it to patients, because they knew that once the patients were taking it, they had a client for life.
Alex Jones, well-known commentator in the States, has said that he would like to see you as Prime Minister. He endorses you. He's also someone who peddled conspiracy theories around the murder of children at Sandy Hook Elementary. Do you accept his endorsement, the idea that he would like for you to be the Prime Minister?
No. And I don't listen to I don't listen to him. The only person that talks about and promotes him is Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau has really gotten into promoting a lot of conspiracy theories, and he is, I think, Canada's top conspiracy theorist. And this is from a guy who dressed up in racist costumes so many times he can't remember them all, who is now causing death and destruction by legalizing crack, heroin, and cocaine in BC, who lets out repeat violent offenders, says he admires the basic Chinese communist dictatorship, has doubled our national debt, doubled housing costs, now wants to force a 61 cent a litre carbon tax on Canadians. That's the kind of radical extremism that we have in our Prime Minister, and he is the one that should reject his and repent for his radicalism, so that we can bring home a common sense government.
And there you go. That's the answer he should have given. Do you accept Alex Jones' endorsement? No, because he's an American. It doesn't matter. And as he said, I don't listen to Alex Jones. I don't watch Alex Jones, and it doesn't matter because there's no political downside. No, I don't accept his endorsement. Move on, because it wasn't an endorsement. Like, this is the thing. They try and cook this up and think it's like some, big demonstration of support. Alex Jones was just commenting on the political situation up in Canada.
Next thing you hear, the Liberals are going to be like, "Hey, those two puppets on Northern Perspective say that you should be the next Prime Minister. What do you think of those two?"
Right? Do you accept those endorsements? They're far right. Renounce them, Pierre. Renounce them now.